Hello, everybody. Welcome back. If you can find your seats. Uh, Colton, can you put the slide back up with the phone number for a second? Or maybe, yeah. I wanted to remind everybody that we're going to have a panel discussion after I finish talking. And so if you have some questions about anything that's been presented today, you'll be able to text this number, and that'll help us have a smooth and successful question and answer period. So if you have questions, please think about them and text them to that number. Thanks. Okay, so my name is Dawn Barker, and I'm a deacon here at Redeemer. I'm also an artist, and artist is something that I've identified with my whole life, and I have used it in a lot of different ways throughout my lifetime. I use it as my professional career right now. For the last almost 10 years, I have been a wool dyer, and Colton, if you could get that, first slide up. I'm a wool dyer and knitwear designer, and I travel around the country teaching advanced knitting skills at retreats and conferences and workshops and things like that. So I know a lot of people probably don't consider what I do art, but I do. So, but I work with color and design all the time. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I've been asked to speak to you today about dealing with grief through art. So I've got to be honest with you, I'm really more of an expert in color theory and design and in my craft than I am about processing grief. But I have been through a season of grief over the last few years, and so hopefully I'll be able to share with you some things that have helped me navigate. So that's what I'm going to talk about. These are some of my designs. Anyway, if you know me or if you've ever seen me at church, you've probably seen me wearing a lot of my designs. But basically what I do is I dye wool. I also write knitting patterns, and then I sell that wool and the knitting patterns and teach people how to make them. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what I do. So if God is the ultimate creator and we're created in his image, then it stands to reason, doesn't it, that we all have a little creative element in ourselves and our own makeup, okay? We can glorify, so that by saying that, I mean, how many of you consider yourselves artists in this room? Okay, not very many hands went up. I'm here to tell you that because you are created in God's image, you have that little spark of creativity in you. Even if you don't consider yourself a professional artist or someone who knows how to paint or knows how to write poetry, I'm here to tell you that you have the ability to use that. And we're going to talk about ways to do that to help process and live our lives. Okay. So we can glorify God by exploring our God-given creative gifts. Creativity can be a personal act of worship, and it can also be a way to bear witness to the watching world. I believe these things to be true, but I believe that creativity is so much more than that. So I just got back from vacation. I actually got to go worship in 3 really awesome Anglican churches while I was gone, St. Paul, Westminster, and York Minster. And when I got home, I talked to Colton, and he asked me on Tuesday if I would speak to you guys today. So, of course, I started thinking about things, but does God ever wake you guys up at night? Have you ever had that experience where you're like, oh, wow. So, of course, I was thinking and praying about what I was going to say to you guys, but at about 3 a.m. on Wednesday, God woke me up with all these insights and just new revelations, I guess, about what creativity is. And it might not sound groundbreaking to you, but for me in that moment it was. And so I've come to understand that creativity is also a profound God-given gift, not just to glorify him with the talents that he's given us, but also so it's for his glory, but it's also for our good, all right? Creating art or practicing a craft can be a powerful tool to help us process our emotions. Processing them involves things like identifying them and examining them and allowing ourselves to be present in them and fully feel them, even when they're hard, right? sometimes when my feelings are too big to express verbally, it's a lot easier for me to kind of pour them out into an act of making than it is to describe them in words. I wanted to clarify, though, what grief is. Grief is our body's response to a loss, right? So it's the process that our body goes through and our brain goes through after we hear some shocking news or experience some sort of loss. And loss can take on a lot of different faces, right? Okay, so we often think about grief in the context of death, but what are some other areas of loss that you can think of? Anybody? Divorce is a really good one. Seth, what do you think? You didn't call me out, but I'm not going to be that kind. What about loss of a job? You know, like loss of your perceived sense of control and security. What about even something good, like when your kids, I'm sorry, what? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, when your kids grow up and they start their lives and they don't need you as much anymore and they're not in your house anymore, and even though that's the goal and you want them to grow up and move out and launch well, it can still trigger kind of a grief for that loss because they're not there anymore, okay? Another really big one that some of us may know better than others right now is a betrayal and a sense of understanding that you really didn't know someone as well as you thought you did, and understanding that your trust has been broken. And when our trust is broken, that can also trigger that grief response in us. So hopefully I'm going to be able to present some things to you today through my story, even though I'm going to be sharing with you in the context of 2 deaths that happened in my life over the last few years. Hopefully you'll still be able to use these things in a way that can be helpful to you too. So processing grief through the practice of craft can give us pathways to get all of that heavy stuff out of our heads by making a physical container for them. The rhythmic practice of craft can even help calm an overwhelmed nervous system. So how do we do this? Well, journeying through grief can look different for every single one of us. None of us are going to process things in the same way, and there's not a right or wrong way to do it, okay? But I'm here to share with you what it has looked like for me for the last few years. In September of 2023, I lost a dear friend and creative mentor after a long battle with breast cancer. Her name was Suzanne Middlebrooks. The following March, my mother discovered that she needed a very high-risk heart surgery, and she was told that there was a good likelihood that she would die on the table, but if she didn't have the surgery, she would definitely die. So she went ahead and went through with the surgery, but she didn't recover. And in August of 2024, after a slow and painful 5-month decline, she died. So in that season, from September when Suzanne died to August when my mom died, and then onward, I found myself in the middle of the tempest of grief. But I was surprised to find that my grief didn't feel like I expected it to. Like the grief over Suzanne's loss and the grief over my mom's loss felt very different to me. My friend Suzanne built a community around a yarn shop in Austin over the course of 42 years, which is crazy to have a small store of any kind for 42 years. She hosted a popular retreat each spring, and people from all over the world came to be part of it. I was honored to be part of it as one of the instructors, one of the teachers, and one of the yarn vendors for the last 6 years of it. Suzanne had a gift for recognizing people's strengths and encouraging them to develop them, even if that person couldn't see it in themselves. And she was just one of those, like, everybody needs to have a Suzanne in their life at least once, someone who really believes in you and encourages you, even when you can't see how something would work. She always could. The reason that I do what I do now, in large part, is due to her encouragement and the opportunities she gave me in our industry. She was kind of a big deal in the yarn world. Grief from my friend felt like profound sadness, mixed with a little bit of gratitude for the time that we had together. And I still miss her. That was Suzanne, yes. So for one last knitting retreat in Austin after her passing, I dyed a special colorway and I named it after her. And I wrote a pattern as a tribute to her, and this is it. In the months that it took to make this piece, I spent hours recalling the encouragement and love that I received from her, and the memories of our friendship are worked into this piece in every stitch. It helped me process her loss, for sure, but it helped me sit in, sorry, I still get choked up when I think about her. It helped me appreciate and kind of land in a place of gratitude after losing her, but understanding that I gained so much from our friendship. And I gained a lot of things personally, but I think she taught me so much about encouraging others. And so if you've ever had a Suzanne in your life, be a Suzanne to someone else, and give it back. The next slide, I'm from the 1900s too, Chris, yeah. My mother, I'm the one standing up. My mother and I had a very difficult relationship. It was very different than the one that I had with Suzanne, even though they were of a similar age. She suffered from undiagnosed mental illness my whole life. And I grew up thinking that her depression and anger and violent behavior were somehow my fault. We were never able to really reconcile and experience what I would call a healthy mother-daughter relationship. So my grief after her passing looked a lot like anger. And as you can hear in my voice, I still feel it. I'm not finished processing this. But lots of things got me through this time. Support from my friends and family, prayer and scripture, professional therapy, my dog Rigel, and of course my craft. Since color and design come naturally to me, it's what I do, I poured my feelings out into color palettes. I became obsessed with sea imagery. This particular colorway is called Kingdom by the Sea, which is an Edgar Allan Poe poem. Can you quote any of that, Seth? Annabel Lee. Just say Annabel Lee over and over. Yeah, it's a poem that Poe wrote after the death of his wife, and it's a poem about grief, for sure. So this was a color that I designed through that grief process and the anger that I felt about my mom's passing. But I became obsessed with sea imagery, and not peaceful oceans with the sunrise glinting across the surface, but rather violent crashing waves on cold North Atlantic shores. I combed YouTube and every streaming service we had for every lighthouse documentary just so I could watch and see the deep blues and frothy greens churn and as the enormous waves battered the rocky coast. The violent stormy seas mimicked perfectly the anger and the sadness that I felt inside. So next slide. Creating something beautiful around my sadness over Suzanne's passing felt right. It made sense. It was rather linear. It was easy to think of her. Like as an artist, that's kind of what I do. I think of a thing and then I create something inspired by that. So it made sense to me. It very much was not simple to create, but it made sense to move forward in her grief that way. But creating something beautiful around my anger was a lot harder. So I decided to name each colorway I dyed using words to describe the things that I wanted to see or the things that I was longing for. So I started naming things like haven and safe harbor and mercy, felicity, which means joy, verity, which means truth, esperanza, which means hope, courage, and Ebenezer, and here's another R word to add to your list, respair. So respair is kind of an archaic word from, I think, 1600s, maybe 1500s, don't quote me on that. That means a renewed sense of hope after a season of despair. So even if my customers don't understand all the funky names that I come up with for my colors, because remember, all of this is for sale, this is my business. Even if nobody else understands why I came up with these names, I know that when I knit with them, I'm focusing on those concepts, and I'm moving out of the despair and out of the sadness and out of the grief and into the healing, just by the act of stitch after stitch rhythmically working with these colors. So now every time I wear the something that I made with the color Respair, I know that it reminds me of my hope in Christ and a renewed sense of hope after a season of despair. So equally transforming in my grief process was prayer. God didn't leave me alone in my anger and sadness. Of course he didn't. He let me rail and rage and cry. He let me be silent when I didn't have words. And he reminded me through his word that this pain is only temporary. In Revelation 21, he promises that someday every tear will be wiped away. He's making all things new. A day is coming when there will be no more mourning or death or crying or sadness or betrayal. All of that's just going to be gone. I can't even imagine that. Can you? Can you imagine what that's going to be like? And all of that means that my mom no longer suffers from a failing heart or from mental illness. She is restored, and someday I will be too. In Matthew 5:4, Jesus calls us blessed when we mourn. Does mourning feel like a blessing to you normally? It doesn't usually to me. But he calls us blessed when we mourn because we will be comforted. And maybe, just maybe, processing grief through creativity is one of the gifts that he wired into us to be able to experience his comfort. So for any of you who don't feel like an artist, tap into that creativity that's in you. Even if you wouldn't ever tell anyone or identify by that label, everybody has the ability to process their emotions through creativity. I truly believe that. And it can take on different forms. I'm not expecting all of you to learn how to knit, but I'm here for you if you want to. But if you find yourself in a season of loss and your emotions feel hard to handle, I encourage you to get them out from bouncing around like a pinball machine in your head and out into a different form. Lean into whatever type of creativity shines in you. Paint, write stories or poetry, journal, make music, bake bread, grow something in the garden. Of course, I'll be over here knitting if anybody wants to join me. But grief can be a process, right? It doesn't happen. It's not like, okay, we're going to make some things, and then all of a sudden everything's better. It can take a long time, and it's not linear. You can backtrack and go through feelings again, even after you think you've dealt with things. And so about 7 years ago, I developed a concept of journal knitting for a class that I was teaching at Suzanne's retreat. And I created it as a way to explore and track personal growth through things like travel and curiosity and learning new things. But in the years since, I've gotten feedback from people all over the world who have used it to track things like chronic headaches and cancer battles, grief, sobriety, self-care, and even prayer habits. In journal knitting, knitters keep a written journal each day and answer a simple focus question within that entry. So you can write whatever you want in the journal, but you also answer a specific question every day, okay? And that question could be a simple yes or no question, and you assign different colors of yarn to the answer that you give. So if you answered yes, you would knit in one color. If you answered no, you would knit in another color, okay? Or you could even make it more complex, like and assign different colors to denote specific feelings. Anger could be red, sadness could be blue, shame could be yellow, and so forth. You don't have to understand color psychology and get all those colors right. The colors that you pick only need to mean something to you, okay? But this concept could easily be modified for painting or graphic journaling as well. So get a big canvas, huge canvas, or as big as you want to, and mark out a big grid, like a calendar almost, on the canvas. And you can just decide how long you want this to take. It could be a month, it could be a week, it could be 3 years, whatever season you would like to track, okay? And each day, or you could make like a big timeline on your wall if you had a wall that you wanted to do this to. And each day you answer that focus question by painting in the appropriate color, all right? And make this process or this craft part of your daily discipline of prayer and worship. Pray as you process. Look for God in the middle of all of it, because he's there, right? I mean, we know that. At the end of the journey, you will have a written record in your journal of this season of your life, but you'll also have a tangible graphic representation of what your days were like. If knit, then wrap up in it and remember that you are so loved by God and you're never alone in your grief. And if painted on canvas or on paper, hang it on your wall as a reminder of God's grace that carried you through. So just as Samuel set an Ebenezer stone to remember God's providence, making tangible objects can give physical reminders of God's presence and provision through our days too. So remember, art is just creative self-expression. Talent is optional, okay? What others think about it doesn't matter. God created each of us differently, so lean into the creative strengths that he gave you. They are his gift. So if you find yourself in a season of grief today, I hope some of these tools might give you some ideas of how to help process. Please know that you're not alone in it. Help is available to you. Find me afterwards if you have questions. I would be honored to pray with you through any of it, or even just discuss some of the things that I've talked about. This is something that I feel very deeply about, and so I really appreciate you guys giving me the chance to share it with you, and I hope that you find it helpful. Next, though, remember to get your questions ready, because we're going to welcome Seth, Chris, and Colton back up for our panel discussion. Thank you.
One more hand for Dawn, everybody. That was incredible. Seth and Chris, would you please join me? We're in like a clapping mode right now. Let's give Seth and Chris a clap. Chris came all the way from Dallas. Seth came from here, but equally as valuable. So what I wanted to share quickly, y'all knew I was going to talk about this. This is an interesting event for me because, I don't have a chair. That's fine, I'll stand. I have the high ground over both of you, which is ironic because Seth and Chris here were both my teachers at one point. I think at the same time. Is that accurate? Chris was my English teacher for a while. Seth was my English teacher for a while. One of my favorite memories of Seth was like my first year of his class. So I'm a musician, obviously, and I was like into this very like angry Christian music, which was ironic. My mom would say, well, if they have the joy of the Lord, why are they screaming? But Seth made us write a report on the song One Headlight by the Wallflowers, and I was like, what is this lame music in 7th grade? And now they're one of my favorite bands, so thank you, Seth. One of my favorite stories about Chris, my last day of high school, senior year, we had a pancake breakfast. Do you remember this story? Anyway, we had a pancake breakfast, and we were finished up. Pancakes were kind of just out, and when pancakes get cold, they turn into, like, perfect Frisbees. Chris was in his classroom working at his desk, and I grabbed a rather large pancake, and I just, went around the corner and, flung it in his room just to, mess with him, and it somehow, I am the least athletic person you will ever meet in your life, but I threw this perfectly, and it hit Chris square in the face and knocked his glasses off. And he looked at me like, you're in big trouble, but I was like, it's my last day. You got nothing on me. So you don't remember that?
Might need to grief process.
You might need to grief process that. Well, we have some great questions. We're gonna go for about probably 10, 15 minutes here. I put my own phone number up there, which is a little weird. If any of you have my phone number, you were like, can I text you things? But we got some really good questions. So, first question for both of you. Must all art created by Christians be explicitly apologetic, evangelistic, or overtly theological? Or is there room for Christian artists to create works that wrestle honestly with doubt, suffering, beauty, and mystery without arriving at a clear resolution or gospel presentation? That was a lot, but it's a great question.
The answer is no.
Okay, talk about it.
I mean, the ones that we were looking at today, the paintings we were looking at today, all were made specifically to go in churches. So the purpose behind those were to aid in worship for theological training.
Oh, sorry.
You're good.
I turned you off. There you go.
So for all of those, that's the purpose of those kinds of paintings. They tell the story of the Christian story. Even for people, especially in the Renaissance, who were illiterate, they couldn't read the Bible anyway. So now we have these pictures for that. However, there is a lot of life that happens outside of the church, outside of these walls. And as a Christian, we have to be dealing with those things. And honestly, a lot of our audience as artists aren't going to be setting foot in a church. I would say most of the people that read my poems don't attend church regularly. And that's one of the goals for me, is to be able to look at the world that they're seeing as well. And like we talked about, with gratitude and honor towards God, somehow see his creation in a way that if it doesn't explicitly mention honoring God, that somehow their heart is drawn towards that. This is a specifically Christian work, but Dante's Divine Comedy, the Inferno and Purgatory and Paradise, it ends with Dante, the pilgrim, this poet, having this vision of heaven. And it talks about him seeing God kind of as a light, but he kind of stopped short of trying to describe what that would have looked like in an explicit way, because it would fail automatically. If you're going to try to paint a picture of God in graven images, it's going to fail. But what if you've read the entire poem, it's led the person's heart to desire God. And if our heart is in that place, it's opened up in that receptive way. Suddenly, we're open to hearing what God can say to us. And I think that, as a Christian, maybe that's one of the things. You take them through the inferno. You take them through hell. You take them through purgatory, where they're purging these things off. And eventually, you wind up in a place of paradise where you can lead them up to God, and then God is there as the fulfillment of their longing.
I anticipated a version of this question, and I wrestled with whether just to use all Christian paintings for that very reason. But it's the stuff I'm most familiar with and know how to talk about in a way that is approachable. So, because don't want to give the impression that unless it's an enunciation, it's not beautiful, or some version of that. I would say there's a tradition in like, if you are a Christian artist, I think it's worth, reflecting on a couple things. One is, how to put it? So, in one of the Narnia books, they're up on a mountain with Aslan, and they can see everything clearly. And it's like, you can see everything at once now, but it's not going to be so when you're down in the valley, because the signs won't be as clear. But remember what's up here so that you can navigate what's down there. And I think as Christians, like from the standpoint of, if the goal of human existence, we really believe that to be united to God and to behold him is like the true destiny of the human. And that's what you just said, related to Dante. Then studying these versions in kind of their most charged form helps us, like when we're down in the valley. But if we're creating down in the valley, we can point into the fog, like out there's a mountaintop over there. And I think there's a lot of art that does that in a really great way. When you're reading the question, the first thing it's like, does Job have an answer at the end of the book? Like, it is one of the great poems of the human history, and it's very do you understand like why humans suffer at the end of that book? Not really. And so there's a gift in that. And the other thing I would talk about is common grace and the image of God, and that there is something to being human, to be made in the image and likeness of God. And however you think about that theologically, like how much of that is lost or marred in the fall, I believe we still have that, the image of God. Even someone who doesn't acknowledge God, doesn't know Christ. So there's symbolisms, there's stories, there's art that's just resonant because we're made in the image and likeness of God. And that's something of what you would call common grace. So we need those stories too. And if you're just going around with enunciations all the time, which I would love to do, but that's not, we need more than that, you know. So please make things that resonate at that deep level with people, but aren't necessarily explicitly Christian.
It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, next question, gentlemen. How do we balance the human draw towards beholding and using art to contemplate and the call to not make images of God as found in the second commandment? I should know the second commandment. JR, what's the second commandment? There you go.
Or images of God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so all of that comes down to, and you know, there's a big fight in church history over this question and icons and things like that. Representations, particularly of Jesus, is that the same as violating the second commandment? And it all comes down to what you think, did something definitively change in the incarnation? So, you know, John says in John 1, no one has seen God, but he has made him known. So the human form of Jesus, I think, does change something. And kind of in the battle in the early church around images, that's kind of where some people landed. Now in the reformational strand, there's versions of it that are much more strict, that you would not have a representation even of Jesus, because it's a violation of the second commandment. Enunciations they definitely meet the bar of either one of those standards. You know, no images of Jesus in those. So it's worth wrestling with, because there are constraints, you know, and there are actually paintings that show God as an old man, and I don't like those paintings. I think those are bad paintings, and I don't mind saying that, because it's like, well, that actually limits and distorts your vision of God if you think God the Father is an old man in the sky with a big old beard. We're really trying to help people not picture him that way, and then if you paint him that way, it's not helpful. So there's a dark side to images that actually limit our ability to see and don't open up our ability to see. And I think there's discernment that has to go along with that stuff. So that's my answer. I don't know.
I think the heart behind that commandment really has to do with worship. So if you're an artist, you make something, and once it is made and is now available for public, you don't have any control over what the public is going to do with it. But there, at least in as far as you're concerned as the maker of the thing, where is your worship being pointed to? To kind of echo what Chris said, there was a famous illustrator who illustrated the Bible in the 1800s named Gustave Doré, and you've probably seen 1,000 of his prints just because they're everywhere. And he has one specifically where he's illustrating, I think it's Isaiah, where God is he's wrestling, not wrestling. He has control over Leviathan, this beast of chaos and evil. And Gustave Doré's depiction of it is literally a man with a long flowing beard with a sword up in the clouds pointing at this prehistoric sea monster. And it really like robs the painting of its power. If it had just been Leviathan in the chaos of this ocean with light coming out of it, at least that, you would have seen somehow that there is something beyond the clouds and the storm of this chaos that is controlling this beast, because the beast is terrified of something that is up there. But instead, it's just an old white guy with a white flowing beard and a sword and a robe, and it's just like nobody's scared of that guy, especially not evil. Evil's not scared of that person. So there is something to be said of it. One, it makes your art worse. Two, there is some issue of worship there. If we're to, because that was JR's question, is like when I sit down to write a poem or dye yarn, what am I doing? What is the thing that I'm really trying to give honor to? And that is God. And if I'm really honoring God, and am I gonna try to depict him as a human? Probably not. I think maybe that's the way to answer that.
That's great. Thank you. On the topic of worship, you were talking about worship. Great question here. How are we to understand the relationship between repetition and novelty in worship as creatures formed by habit but prone to rigidity of thought?
One more time.
How are we to understand the relationship between repetition and novelty in worship as creatures formed by habit but prone to rigidity of thought?
Novelty in art is a tricky one because to be good art, it has to be a little bit novel. I mean, novel as in it feels new. Like I talked about earlier, like good poetry is taking a mundane thing, something that's become everyday and we don't even see it anymore because we've experienced it so often, and cracking it and giving it a fresh perspective on it. So to be novel is to give the fresh perspective on the thing, whether it's in using different kinds of language, even the enunciation that we saw. We've seen, if you're in art history, you've seen this image or some version of it 100 times, but you get to the one where it's just a beam of light, and suddenly that's novel, it's new. The problem is, what a lot of the art world does is they try to short circuit that and say, what is transgressive? What is something that's going to shock people because that feels novel? And then by that shock, we're going to get them to pay attention. But it's, and if I have a complaint about the Amarillo art scene, it's that they want to go to the transgression, which is just, it's not actually novel. In fact, at this point in history, transgression is extremely boring and mundane. Everybody does it. So that's the first part of the question. How do we do something that's novel? And then the other part of it, how do we, the rigidity of thought?
Yes.
Especially in worship.
Basically, how do we hold in tension the relationship between repetition and novelty in worship as creatures formed by habit but prone to rigidity of thought?
I mean, there's lots of ways to do that. You could talk about like worship music, or you could talk about the liturgy, like the order of the service. I think there's maybe let's just take worship music. If I turn on Air One, which I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm going to hear almost the exact same song over and over again. And the only time I ever listen to it is when I'm getting my hair cut at Great Clips, because it's the only
Shout out Great Clips. Love Great Clips.
And every time I'm in there, I'm like, well, this all sounds exactly the same. And over the course of history, you've had a million kinds of worship music, and I get kind of bored with it. And they all, and so much of it is really kind of a Jesus is my boyfriend kind of thing, where it's like, I love Jesus. It's not novel anymore. There are other things to talk about with God. There's a song we've been singing in church, which I find really refreshing lately, that talks about God's wrath. You all know it. It's something it's been in our.
There's a couple of those.
Yeah, and it's not like we're just sitting here in doom and gloom, saying like, "This is God's wrath. Let's worship God because he holds lightning bolts." But I found it refreshing because it's it makes me think of God in another way that is true, not transgressive, but it helps me to see a bigger, more beautiful picture of who God is. Because we not only do get his wrath, but you also get his mercy. And that helps whenever I take communion, when I receive communion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. To know that like that wrath is there, but I'm also receiving his mercy. I have the herb of grace. Yep.
Chris?
Yeah, so I feel I take the question personally as a coming from a more liturgical tradition, because there's a cycle and a structure to the way that we do our worship, but there's a cycle and structure with variation in the sense of moving through a year, what we call the church calendar, the liturgical year.
We do the church calendar here, bro.
Yeah.
Shout out to the church calendar.
Yep. It's the church's calendar. It's the way we think about time. And I think wrapped up with this question is, how do we think about time? So the church calendar is built on the life of Christ, and we cycle through that year by year. And the hope is that it works as a spiral that deepens, so that the best kind of repetition is what deepens us. But we have to meet repetition with receptivity. Another R word. Because it can become new based on our posture, I think. That's one way things become new. And also because humans are so different and various and have different angles. And I think this is a body of Christ thing. I think it's a spiritual gift thing. It's not just my perspective. It's our perspectives together. And I think that helps come at repetition in this healthy way that doesn't feel rigid. And that each season has its own emphasis and blessing within the church year, which is, let's just pick one.
Hit me with Advent.
Advent, yeah, anticipation. So putting yourself in the posture of two things. One, we are Israel waiting for the consolation. We're Simeon. We're waiting for the first Advent. We're waiting for that consolation. But we're also waiting that he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. That second Advent too. Entering the posture of the first Advent helps me get into that mindset. Can I be like Simeon and be ready to receive? We didn't even talk about the prophetess Anna and the rest of that. But she's 84 years old. And she's waiting too. She waited a long time. By the way, 84 is 7 times 12. 2 numbers of completion. So that kind of stuff, super cool.
Love that.
The last thing I would say is the Revelation passage. Behold, I make all things new. A Christian understanding of novelty, I think, is in that. I make all things new, not I make all new things. God redeems his creation. He doesn't throw it all out and start over. I make all things new. I think that's, if we're made in his image, all we can take is the goods of creation and try to make them new. I think that helps us think about novelty in a different way.
That was great. Thank you. Okay, just a couple more. We've got 5 minutes. We can do this. Okay. What are your thoughts on the role of inspiration in the lives of believers and non-believers in creativity or in the creative process? Inspiration.
For it.
I would imagine you are.
Hot take. For it.
Yeah, agreed. I wonder, I don't know who asked the question, is it implied in that question that Christians would have a special access to inspiration? I don't know. I don't think that's true. I don't think that Robert Frost was a Christian. But I can read Robert Frost's poems and see that he was clearly inspired. Probably a lot of the Renaissance art painters weren't Christians as we would call a Christian, but they were clearly inspired. So, where that inspiration comes from, I don't know. I think as Christians, though, I think it's very important that we recognize where that inspiration comes from, that we would give thanks to God and honor him as God, because that goes back to that issue of worship. Otherwise, we want to take on that glory or give glory to the image that we have made, which is an exchange of the immortal image of God for the mortal image of man, or birds or creeping things. So I think as Christians, the discipline we have to have is constantly. The inspiration is there. It is not the be-all, end-all of all things. We are not singing, "Oh, Muse, tell me these things." I am singing, "God, how can I glorify you?"
It's great. Okay, last question for the day. Topical, because this event is kicking off Art Week here at Redeemer. We're about to walk into 4 and 4. Do you even know what this is? 4 and 4? I told you about it. We talked a long time ago. For those of you in the room who may not know what 4 and 4 is, it's this next week here at Redeemer. We've been doing it for the last few years, where we encourage the congregation to start and finish a creative endeavor every day for 4 days. And it's probably my favorite thing we do every year. It's really wonderful, and the fact that we get to kick it off with this is great. And so this question is about that. What advice would you guys give to people who want to participate in 4 and 4, or just creativity as a spiritual discipline in general, but face the mental block of feeling like something not done well or perfectly is not worth doing?
There's an artist that I follow named John Hendricks, who's an illustrator by trade, and he has lots of books. He has a really great biography of the friendship of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. But he has this model that he follows, which is basically, you all have a wonderful idea. You constantly, any human being is inundated with beautiful ideas. And the first thing that happens is I reach out and I want to take the idea. God has inspired you. And then the next step is to fall off this cliff and land in the pit of despair, because you realize to take the idea that I have, I cannot make that idea come into a form. It's just not going to happen. And you start off, the beginning of the project is actually in the pit of despair. And then there's this long slog out of that. And eventually, if you stick with it, you will come out with something. And you know what? It doesn't matter how good it is, if it's that or Michelangelo or anybody else, they got to the end of it and they said, well, it's still not as good as the idea was. But it's enough to keep them going. And for us, on the outside of it, we would look at that and be like, that's incredible. It gave me an idea. It inspired me. Now I'm in the pit of despair, and we start off again, right? So and also, if you think about what next week is, 1 project per day, and you all probably have jobs, and then you're at work for 7 or 8 hours, or 9 or 10, or however long, and you've got 30 minutes at the end of the day, or maybe you stay up late and you work on it for 3 hours. It's not going to be good. You're not making a masterpiece. You are going to try to get something out. I bought 4 4-inch canvases for next week, and I'm going to try to get something on them. Not that I'm a painter by trade, but I wanted to do it. So that's my preparation for next week, and I will give myself an hour tops to fill out 4 inches of a canvas and I'm only using black and white. So limiting what you can do is probably going to help, but you're not going to turn out a masterpiece next week. But that's okay.
Yeah. Does anybody know the name Austin Kleon? He's an artist. He has a Substack. He's got these great books that are like field guides being an artist. The first one's called Steal Like an Artist, and he's got drawings in it, but he has a new book called Don't Call It Art, What I Learned from My Children. And the whole book is about like bringing back playfulness to creativity. And I think that's really important. It's like Paul talks about in Romans 8, like to walk in the glorious liberty of the children of God. What is the glorious liberty of the children of God? It's like to know that I'm an adopted son or daughter of God, and that's not like that's meant to be really playful in a way, and so it's maybe a fancy way of saying like really just have fun with it, and that finishing, like a lot of people, like Seth's talking about, just get caught up in the beginning of it because there's this romanticism about the idea. But I think finishing is like its own amazing thing. Like, I completed it, and then you were talking about Hendricks and Tolkien. If you read Tolkien on creativity, he's very careful to say, like, we're not creators, we're sub-creators. And I actually think that if you brace that from a posture of playfulness, it's really freeing. I can't make, there's one creator who spoke everything into existence, and he has given us stewardship over his creation to take the goods of creation and then like lift them back up to him. But it's like when my daughter brings a drawing to me. Look, Dad, what I made. I made this for you. There's a joy in it. There's a playfulness in it. So that would be my encouragement, is maybe don't call it art. You know, it's like I'm gonna have fun with this, and my job is to do it and to complete it, and then to actually pay attention to what I feel while I'm doing it. I do some writing, and I talk to some people who have no interest in writing, who say that they want to be writers. And what do I mean by that? Like, they want to have written a book, but they have no interest in, just like, and this is Annie Dillard in her book on writing. Somebody asked her, it's like, do you think I could be a writer? And she says, I don't know. Do you like sentences? And that's a really good question. Like, I want to be a painter. Great. Do you like the smell of oil paint? Do you like having it on your fingers? Do you like that? Do you like the experience of doing the thing? Or do you want to be known as the person who does the thing? So this is another Austin Kleon thing. He says, use the verb. Like, don't say I'm a creative. Like, I write, I paint, and it's like, well, what does a painter do? Has these materials and does these things in this context and practices this craft. And that's what I would say. It's like, pay attention to, as you're creating, like, what does it feel like to be creating? And then what does it feel like to finish? That's what I would say.
That's great.
Yeah.
One more hand for Chris and Seth, everybody. We're going to close here. Just an encouragement, even if you don't attend Redeemer. Oh, my goodness. Did you just turn that off? Thank you. Well, that's what you get. Even if you don't attend Redeemer, take part in 4 and 4. It's really, it's a really, for me, it's always very humbling. It takes a lot of discipline, and it's always really generative and fulfilling for me. So take part in it. 4 and 4 is this week. Friday night is night 5 up here at Redeemer, which is basically like we all get together, we can share what we made, we hang out, we eat food. It's great. 6 o'clock Friday night. 2 more quick things. Painting giveaway. I did this earlier. It's going to sound like I'm cheating right now, like I'm just picking somebody, but I put all the names into an app that spun a wheel, and then it selected a name, Joanne Frimmel. Yes, on this beautiful painting. Clap for Audrey and Dawn and Taylor, everybody, and Michael Gowdy, Peyton Gowdy, everybody that helped. I'm going to pray for us, and we're going to get out of here. Lord Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for these people, everybody in here. I thank you for the gifts of poetry and painting and creativity, good gifts that you have given us that we did not deserve. Pray that we would steward them for your glory, for our good, and that we would see you in them and see you in those around us. In Jesus' name, amen.